My name is Madeline Shaw, but most people just call me Maddie. I'm 32, live alone in a small craftsman house just outside Santa Rosa, and co-run a nonprofit that helps elderly patients navigate hospice care. It was a Wednesday morning when the envelope arrived. Heavy cream paper. Embossed seal. My name, Miss Madeline Shaw, in perfect calligraphy like I was being invited to someone else's celebration. But it wasn't a celebration. It was the will reading. Of my mother. The mother I'd cared for in her final months. The mother who once said, "You always come last, Maddie, but somehow you're always the one left standing." I stared at the envelope for a long time. Didn't cry. Didn't open it. Just reached into my drawer, pulled out the scarf she gave me before things went cold, and folded it carefully across my lap. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be just paperwork. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I believed that love, in a family, was given freely. That if you showed up, stayed quiet, did what was asked, you'd be seen. But in our house, visibility belonged to my sister, Vivian. She was the one with the perfect posture, the designer blazers, the smile that charmed every room she walked into. I was the background. I was the one who drove Mom to her appointments when no one else would. The one who cooked soup when she couldn't hold a spoon. The one who stayed overnight at the hospital when her blood pressure wouldn't stabilize. But Vivian? She called in updates from board meetings, sent flowers from hotel lobbies. She made Mom feel important in public. I made sure she was safe in private. When we were kids, it was little things. Vivian got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a used bike and a warning to lock it up. She skipped college to find herself. I worked 2 part-time jobs just to afford community college textbooks. Even the walls of our family home knew where we each stood. Vivian's high school portraits lined the hallway. Mine were stuffed in a box in the attic. She had a room with bay windows and monogrammed bedding. I had the guest room with no closet. But I never complained. Not once. Not when Mom forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. Not when I paid for her prescriptions and got a one-word thanks. Not when Vivian rewrote the narrative so she could remain the golden daughter. Because that's what I did. I stayed quiet. And somewhere along the way, I started to believe that silence was strength. That being the one who endured made me better. But it also made me disappear. When Mom got sick, really sick, Vivian wasn't around. She showed up just in time to sign the power of attorney papers. Told the hospice team she'd handle everything. Then left me to explain why Mom's jewelry was missing. Why the locks had been changed. No one ever said it, but I knew. Vivian wasn't just Mom's favorite. She was the daughter everyone expected to succeed. I was the one expected to serve. And yet, despite all of that, I still loved my mother. Even when she let Vivian speak for her. Even when she called me her steady girl like that was all I was good for, being quiet and reliable. I didn't expect to inherit anything. I just wanted to say goodbye. But that letter changed everything. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at the estate was how little had changed. Same gravel driveway that crunched too loud under my tires. Same heavy iron gates that opened slow, like the place was deciding whether or not to let me in. Even the front porch smelled the same, lemon polish and clipped magnolias. But I didn't enter through the front. Vivian always did. I was told to go around back. I parked near the garden entrance, brushed a crease from my thrifted black dress, and reminded myself that this wasn't about appearances. Then I stepped into the brunch. Everything looked like it had been staged for a magazine spread, vintage glassware, linen tablecloths, fresh orchids on every table. The family was gathered on the stone terrace, sunlight filtering through striped canopies, everyone dressed in garden attire. Like this was a celebration. Not a will reading. My Aunt Margot greeted me with a soft hug. Her arms were thinner than I remembered. "Maddie," she said, eyes kind but cautious. "Your mother would be glad you're here." "I hope so," I replied, though I didn't believe it. The others barely glanced at me. Until Vivian turned. She didn't smile. "Not really." "Oh," she said loudly, like a hostess surprised by an uninvited guest. "Didn't realize they were letting +1s to the reading." Someone chuckled. "Nervous?" "Quick." Like they didn't mean to. I didn't respond. Just nodded and took the empty seat at the far end of the table. My dress wasn't expensive. My shoes were flats. My purse was canvas. I didn't match their world, but I came anyway. Because I had the envelope. Because I had every right to be there. I kept my eyes forward as the lawyer stepped out from the sunroom. Mr. Whitmore. Gray suit, polished glasses, the kind of voice trained for uncomfortable announcements. Thank you all for coming, he began. Vivian moved to stand beside him, her hand on his arm like they were old friends. Her voice dripped sugar. Let's hope this doesn't turn into one of Maddie's surprises, she said brightly, then let out a cutting little laugh. No one said a word. But they didn't challenge her either. I sat still. My hands folded in my lap. My pulse loud in my ears. Mr. Whitmore handed me a form to sign. Just a formality, he said. Only me. No one else had to sign. Aunt Margot leaned over and whispered, they didn't do that last time. I looked at the paper. Blank legalese. No details. Just my name and a signature line. I'd like a copy, I said calmly. Vivian's husband shifted beside her, uncomfortable but silent. Vivian tilted her head toward me, smiling just enough to show her teeth. You were always thorough, she said. Even when it didn't matter. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them. Light. Public. Weaponized. She wanted them to laugh. She wanted me to flinch. I didn't give her either. Instead, I reached into my bag and pressed my fingers around the silk scarf folded neatly inside. My mother's initials stitched in blue. The last thing she gave me before the distance became permanent. Vivian's voice faded. But the damage had landed. And I knew, this wasn't going to be just a reading. This was a setup. I didn't say anything. Even as Vivian poured herself another mimosa like nothing had happened. Even as I watched her casually lean toward Uncle Barrett, whisper something with a too-sweet smile. I kept still. But my eyes didn't. Across the long table, just beneath the crisp white linen, I saw it. Vivian's hand sliding a folded document into Barrett's lap. Quick. Smooth. Practiced. She didn't even look down. Just glanced sideways, then turned her face to the sun like nothing had moved. But I saw it. And I remembered something Mom said once. If they lie in the light, they'll do worse in the dark. Vivian had always known how to perform. Especially when the stakes were high. I let my eyes drop back to my plate. A half-eaten croissant. One pale strawberry. Everything too perfect to touch. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. If we're all settled, I'll begin reading the last will and testament of Eleanor Shaw. The air shifted. People straightened in their seats. Glasses were set down. Conversation silenced. Vivian stayed standing beside the lawyer, like she was about to co-host the reading. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I was too focused on the words that hadn't been spoken yet. The ones I suspected might change everything. Mr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and unfolded the document like it was made of glass. He looked up once, right at me. You may want to sit down for this, he said. Vivian laughed lightly. Oh, come on. Mom wouldn't leave Maddie more than the recipe box. A few strained chuckles followed. Most didn't laugh. One woman coughed, awkwardly. But I still didn't speak. Because silence, when used right, is louder than any outburst. Mr. Whitmore began reading. The entirety of the Shaw estate, property, accounts, belongings, is hereby left to Madeline Shaw. A glass shattered. Somewhere behind me, someone hissed, "You've got to be kidding." I didn't turn. I kept my gaze on the edge of the tablecloth, hands folded tightly in my lap. Like I needed to anchor myself to the fabric to keep from floating out of my own body. Vivian's voice dropped several octaves. What? Mr. Whitmore didn't pause. That is what the document states. My breath caught. Everything? I had come expecting scraps. A token. Maybe Mom's scarf, a photo album, something sentimental. But not this. Then he continued. There is a clause. The inheritance is contingent upon Miss Shaw residing in the family estate for a minimum of 1 year. The sound around me returned, chairs shifting, forks scraping, a sharp inhale from someone on my right. And, he added, looking directly at Vivian, Miss Vivian Shaw is barred from initiating any financial changes to the property during that time. Vivian stepped forward, voice shaking. She manipulated her. Mom wasn't in her right mind. But the words didn't land the way they used to. Even Uncle Barrett was avoiding her eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't react. I just exhaled. Soft. Quiet. Controlled. And in that moment, I decided something. I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to prove. I was going to let the truth speak. On its own. In silence. Because that's what she had never prepared for. The room had gone quiet again. But it wasn't the kind of quiet I grew up with, the kind that settled like a fog over family dinners when my name wasn't mentioned. No, this silence was dense. Sharp. It crackled like static just before a storm. Mr. Whitmore reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. She also left this, he said, for you, Maddie. He walked toward me slowly, laying the envelope on the table like it might break. It was pale blue. Heavy. The kind of paper you don't use unless you mean every word. My name was on the front. In my mother's handwriting. I picked it up with both hands. My fingers trembled, but I kept my face steady. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes for half a second, breathing in the moment. Not because I was savoring it, because I didn't trust myself to feel it yet. Then I opened the letter. Her voice hit me before I read the first word. I could hear it between the lines, hoarse, tired, but still hers. The woman who had once called me her steady girl. The woman who, for so long, I thought had forgotten how to see me. But she had been watching. All along. To Madeline, it began. You showed up when no one else did. You made me soup when I couldn't speak. You stayed when your sister filed power of attorney papers behind my back. You asked for nothing. You gave me dignity. I stopped reading. Not out loud. Not to them. This was mine. Vivian's arms were crossed. Her jaw set. She looked like she was about to interrupt, but Mr. Whitmore held up a second sheet of paper. There's more, he said. This is an addendum, signed and notarized, dated after the initial revisions. It confirms her full cognitive clarity and her reasons for changing the will. He glanced at Vivian. She specifically cited your attempt to sell the estate without her consent as a breach of trust. A murmur rippled through the guests. Vivian's husband shifted uncomfortably in his chair. One of our cousins avoided eye contact entirely. But Vivian wasn't done. She was dying, she said through clenched teeth. You're going to take her word after months of medication? She was confused. No, Aunt Margot said suddenly, her voice clear, cutting through the room like cold wind. She wasn't confused. She was tired. And disappointed. That landed. Vivian's face paled. I folded the letter again and tucked it back into the envelope. No grand gesture. No monologue. Just movement, precise, quiet, final. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat again. Unless there are legal objections, the estate now belongs to Maddie. Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the stone floor. You don't get to erase everything I've done, she snapped. I'm not erasing anything, I said quietly. You did that all on your own. She stared at me like she couldn't believe I was speaking at all. And that's when I realized. It wasn't the will that broke her. It wasn't the house or the money. It was the silence. My silence. The kind she couldn't spin. The kind she couldn't control. Because for the first time in her life, she was the one being watched. And I was finally being heard. We moved from the terrace to the lounge as if nothing had happened. Finger sandwiches still lined silver trays. Mimosas were being topped off like it was any other Sunday brunch. Someone even had the audacity to cue up soft jazz. But the air had shifted. I sat near the window, alone with a porcelain cup of black coffee I didn't touch. The blue envelope rested in my lap like a secret weapon. Across the room, Vivian was working the crowd. She smiled a little too wide. Spoke a little too fast. Leaned in just enough to make people forget what they'd seen. Damage control. It was her gift. But I wasn't playing anymore. Aunt Margot sat beside me. Quiet. Watchful. She didn't speak, just gave me a slight nod, like we were both done pretending. Then came Vivian's voice, loud, casual, aimed just enough in my direction. Maddie always had a way of twisting things, she said to a group of family friends. She showed up at the end and suddenly became the hero. Funny how that works. One of the women, Mrs. Langley, Mom's old church friend, set down her glass a little too hard. "That's low," she murmured, not quite under her breath. I stood. Not in anger. Not to perform. But because I had something to say. Vivian turned toward me, her smile frozen. "You want to keep talking?" I asked, calm and clear. "Then let's talk. About the wire transfers. The realtor. The emails. The voicemail Mom left after you filed the papers behind her back." Gasps weren't loud. But they were present. Vivian blinked. "You wouldn't." "I kept everything," I said, folding my arms. "Timestamped. Signed. Notarized. Want to test me?" She didn't speak. The guests were no longer looking at her. They were watching me. For once, the room wasn't bending to her gravity. "You've mistaken quiet for weak your entire life," I said. "That's over now." I turned, walked back to my seat, and let the silence fall. But this time it wasn't mine. It was hers. And it was deafening. I didn't celebrate. There were no smiles. No victory laps. No dramatic exits. Just the slow act of gathering my things, my coat, my scarf, the envelope, and stepping outside as the sun dipped behind the oaks. A few reporters lingered near the driveway, hoping for a statement. I said nothing. Let them write what they wanted. The truth didn't need polishing. A week later, a yellow manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, typed clean and cold. Inside, a motion to contest the will. Vivian had filed on the grounds of undue influence. Said I coerced a dying woman into rewriting her legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I walked straight to my office, unlocked the bottom drawer of the old file cabinet Mom and I refinished years ago, and pulled out the red folder she'd helped me label. Inside were copies of everything. Signed addendums. Voicemails. Hospice notes. Even the nurse's written report detailing how Vivian tried to move Mom into care against her will. All in order. All clean. All real. 3 days later, I stood in court, calm blouse, flat shoes, steady breath. Vivian arrived with a publicist and her lawyer. I arrived with the truth. The judge didn't take long. The new will was validated. The video testimony confirmed. The signatures matched. Even the hospice nurse showed up to speak. Vivian didn't argue this time. She just sat there, shoulders rigid, lips pressed into a line so thin it disappeared. Outside, the press asked for interviews. I said one thing. My mother made her decision. I honored it. That's all. Then I walked away. Not triumphant. Just finished. At home that evening, I found a letter tucked into an old recipe book Mom had given me years before. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was hers. To my silent girl, it began. "You were never invisible to me. I just didn't know how to show you. But I saw. I always saw." I didn't read the rest right away. I let the words settle. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need proof that I mattered. I already knew. Some victories don't come with applause. Sometimes, they arrive in silence, in folded letters, steady steps, and the peace of not needing to prove yourself anymore. Vivian may never apologize. The family may keep whispering behind closed doors. But I don't need their permission to heal. I have the house. I have her words. And I have myself. If you've ever been the quiet one, looked over, talked around, erased. I hope you know this. You're not alone. Tell me. Have you ever let silence speak for you? Drop a comment. I'll be reading. Quietly.